for this segment of What's Neat. This is going to be more or less a layout construction / photography segment in that Athearn has asked me to reproduce another photograph. And this is a shot that they had found on the internet. And we are going to do this shot with a steam locomotive on it, so I took a pencil drawing of the shot, a sketch, just to represent on how it's going to look with 10 trestle bents, hill, and then a steam locomotive. We are going to use this beautiful locomotive from Athearn. This is that brand new Northern Pacific articulated locomotive, and I am plotting out the scene on a sheet of foam like I always do, except for this is a little different in that we are going to be building a bridge on this. So I've got to build 10 trestle bents, and I've got them at 15 foot on centers, marked off and plotted out. I've already cut off the corner of this diorama so that I can get my camera right in here and then start filming or start laying out the scene and plotting it out. The back of the hill will be here, the trestle will be here, and the locomotive will be placed on the scene with all the trees. And it should come out just like the concept drawing that we've got. So let's see how this project turns out. This will be kind of a fun, quick project. We'll build a jig and make some trestle bents real quick. To start the project, I drew lines to the size of the diorama and cut this section out of the 4x8 sheet of foam, revealing a photo diorama measuring 28 inches wide and about 40 inches long. To stack the foam and build the topography to match our concept drawing, I glued 2-inch thick pieces of foam into place with Great Stuff Foam Pro. I set weights on top of this and let it cure for about an hour. I carved the foam scene using a pruning saw, a chainsaw, and my Stanley Sureform planer, working my way around the diorama and checking measurements for the bridge's placement into the scene until everything looked prototypically accurate to create a realistic looking scene for our photograph. I sealed the diorama with a coat of flat latex paint and let this dry overnight. The next morning I noticed the foam had warped as the latex paint had dried. This would be a very unstable base for our wood bridge and make it hard to build it level. The solution to this was to cut another layer of foam and glue this with the foam glue, making the scene about 4 inches thick where the bridge will go. I then placed a lot of weight on top of the scene, letting it cure and set up on a perfectly level surface for about an hour. I measured from the bridge's deck location to the foam, understanding how long the trestle bents needed to be, figuring I would sink the bents into the foam about 1/2 inch. Going through my dowel rod stock, I was looking for poles with a scale diameter of about 13 to 14 inches, and this came out to 3/16 inch, so these dowel rods fit the bill perfectly. I used 80 grit sandpaper, and with this I cut wood grain into our dowel rods, along with making the diameter just a little smaller, about 12 scale inches. I then cut 60 dowel rod pieces using a table saw, measuring each to be about 2.5 inches long or about 18 scale feet in HO scale. Using prototype photos and dimensions taken from prototype railroad standard books, I had built the first bent by hand, which this one will be used to make our trestle jig. To build the jig, I glued HO scale switch ties to the jig's surface, placing them on each side of each dowel rod tight, leaving no space for slippage or movement. I took my time with this part of the process, as this will determine the quality of our model throughout. After the glue started to set up, I carefully removed the trestle bent from the jig with a razor knife, revealing our new trestle bent building tool. To build a trestle bent using the jig, I placed 5 dowel rods into the jig's grooves. Then, using a file, I filed the tops of these to create the angles so that they would match up with our 14-foot long top cap stringer. I glued 3x10 cross braces into place. Then I attached the pre-cut 3x10 sway braces with wood glue. I then added cross braces and sway braces to the other side of each bent, attaching these with wood glue. The building process got quicker after I built a few trusses, working my way through the bridge one bent at a time until I had 10 completed, ready for super detailing next. If you study prototype photos of trestles, you'll see that they are not glued, but instead bolted together, and I wanted to include this detail in our photo diorama. Using a drill press, I drilled holes with a number 65 drill bit into 11 locations where the bolts would hold the structure together. I then glued Grant Line 2¼ inch nut and bolt castings into each of the holes, gluing these into place with CA glue. To build the bridge's top deck, I followed prototype standards of just under 8 feet wide and cut this part of the bridge from a 1/4 inch piece of oak plywood. It scaled out to be 16 inches high, that of a standard stringer, without having to lay each stringer board individually, adding strength to our bridge and saving a lot of time for a detail that will not look out of place in the final photograph. I glued scale bridge ties across our bridge deck, keeping everything square and evenly spaced. I did cut down one of the bents using a reverse saw guide on the bandsaw. This bent will be at the end of the bridge, where the topography moves uphill. I placed a level atop the deck just to make sure everything would line up, ensuring level rail and a perfect transition from track to bridge, along with understanding how deep into the foam the trusses will be placed. I glued the trestle bents to the bottom of the bridge deck with wood glue, all at the same time. I used steel blocks, just to make sure everything would set up perfectly square to the bottom of the bridge's deck. I placed the bridge onto the diorama and marked where the bents would meet the earth, so I would know where to cut and carve the foam to sink the trestle into our scene. I used a Dremel with a router bit attached to cut the channels into the foam. I test fit the bridge into the foam, making sure everything lined up perfect and level on both ends and in the middle. So far, so good. Everything really lines up and fits level. The bolt castings look great, and things are going together pretty smooth on this project. I painted the trestle with a can of Rust-Oleum Camouflage Brown spray paint. This will dry flat, and it'll be a good base coat as we further color the bridge with a little bit of weathering and some black spray paint. I filled the grooves cut into the diorama with a bead of Gorilla Glue. I then placed the bridge on the scene, sinking it into the glue, lining things up level and straight on both ends. Now I want to walk you through putting the bridge into the diorama real time, because I want to explain exactly how I've done this. The most important dimension on this bridge is the top of the rail. It's got to be level all the way across through the whole project. So what I've done is I've made sure that this table I'm working on is completely level, so that when I put a level on the diorama, I'll know that I'm laying the bridge in perfectly level and the bubble's centered. The bridge is shimmed out with a piece of steel and a piece of thin plywood that I know creates the same exact dimensions for the bubble to be centered. So right now I have also one more thing I want to explain is I've got a piece of microengineering railroad ties right here to help ensure the fact that when I lay the track's bottom, the bottom of the rail will match with the top deck of the bridge. So everything will be flush and perfectly level as you look through the plane of the photograph when I shoot the model on this bridge. So with the level in place, I'm going to take a clamp and clamp the bridge so that it is attached to the bottom of the level. This will ensure our dimension across the top is perfect and level throughout. I can't explain, this is just very important. Now I've put some Gorilla Glue inside all of the cavities where the bridge is sitting, and all I've got to do is spray a little bit of water into the cavities to activate the glue. The glue will then expand and permanently mount our bridge in place. As the glue expands, I'm going to stay here and monitor it and just make sure that it doesn't creep up above the scenery line, because if it does, I'm going to push it back down while it's wet before it cures, while I can still handle that. That way I don't have to carve it down. So at this point, I spray the water into the cavity, which I'm going to do right now. and activate the glue. Everything's completely level, everything's clamped, both ends are secure, and we can finish the scenery and everything after this bridge is mounted. The only other dimension I haven't checked here, I want to check the sideways dimension too, to make sure that's perfect. So I put this torpedo level on top here, and just make sure that my bubble is perfectly level across the top laterally, sideways here, which it is right now it is. So now I'm going to spray water into the cavity and activate the glue. And our bridge will start to set up permanently in the base. And now we just wait. We just wait, let it sit, let it cure, and see if this doesn't mount absolutely perfect, just the way we want it to. Because actually I've got a deadline on this where I've got to have this thing shot in less than 36 hours, so I really got to hustle on this and get this thing done. I stayed with it for about a half an hour, making sure the expanding foam would not creep up the trestle vents by using a dental pick to keep the earth's surface flat around the bridge's base. After the glue cured, I was able to free the bridge from its bondage of clamps, weights, levels, revealing the finished structure. I painted the area around the base of the bridge with a coat of camouflage paint and let this dry to a flat finish. I peeled the ties off of a piece of Code 70 microengineering track, the length of the bridge. This rail will lay atop the bridge deck, giving a smooth transition from the land to the bridge. I glued the track to the scene with liquid nails adhesive. I then glued the rails to the deck using contact adhesive, keeping the rail to a correct gauge using an HO scale track gauge. These two are available from microengineering. I weighted everything into place for about an hour as the two types of glues cured. I further secured the rail onto the bridge deck by spiking it with HO scale track spikes, pushing them into the wood deck with pliers. I cut 16-foot long 4x8 guard timbers with my Northwest Shortline chopper. These will be attached to the deck just outside the rail for the length of the entire bridge. I repainted the diorama with more of an earth tone latex paint. This will blend better with dirt, allowing the diorama to be used in additional photos with different scenery for future photo shoot assignments. I painted the trestle with a mist of black paint, giving it that creosote look. I covered the deck with a 2x2 to protect it as I started covering the whole diorama with sifted dirt through a screen, working my way around the entire scene, trying to keep all the dirt even. I added riprap around the end abutment, working it around the area with an artist brush. I ballasted the track with Woodland Scenic's gray fine ballast and worked this in between the ties with the same fan brush. I glued the dirt, ballast, and riprap into place with two 16-ounce bottles of Woodland Scenic cement, soaking the scene thoroughly and letting this dry overnight. So the next day, the dirt and the ballast and everything's dried, and I'm ready to shoot this diorama now. It's shoot day, and I've got to shoot this thing in 3 hours. So I've got the locomotive set up in a position here where it needs to be on the scene. I've got the camera, so that now what I can do is fill out the photograph in the front area here, this area here, and just a little here with trees. I need it to look wintry with trees. So I'm going to take the trees off of the Blackstone diorama that I built a year ago in 2015 for Christmas for Blackstone, and I'm literally going to pull off the super trees, the wire trees, and probably a few of the pine trees and just work them into the scene, make it look balanced, and then I'm going to sprinkle snow on top of everything except for the locomotive. I'm going to have to clean the track. I need snow on the freight cars. There's all kinds of little variables to think about because when this goes outside I also have to connect DCC to it so I get good headlights, marker lights, number boards, all the things that are on the locomotive that light up. So just 3 more hours, a few more trees, and this thing's going to be ready to shoot. So let's see what happens next. I took my time planting trees and vegetation in the scene using wire trees and super trees. All of these were painted with camouflage brown paint before placing them into the scene. I looked through the camera each time I planted a tree, making sure the composition looked prototypically accurate and balances well with the photograph and the locomotive on the bridge. Since the photo we are going to shoot will be a cold February snow scene, Chris Palomares asked that I add icicles to the bottom of the bridge. I did this by dabbing silicone caulk in various areas under the structure. This effect will add just a little more magic to the final photograph, especially if the sun is out. So I need to set up and shoot this in the next hour, and now we're going to make it snow. So I set up the high-speed camera so you can watch how I do this. Okay, I'm out here shooting the diorama now, and I'm fighting another brisk wind to the point where I've literally had to paintbrush off the locomotive in between every shot that I took because the plaster is getting blown onto the side of the model and onto my lens. So I've been cleaning everything as I went along. I've got the DCC hooked up. Everything frames out real nice in this shot. So I'll process these photographs through a focus stacking program. I'll give them to Chris Palomares and let him work his Photoshop magic, whatever he'd like to do to this shot, and then we'll be able to see what the finished shot looks like. But so far the dioramas went together really nice, quick. So far so good on this shoot. So let's see how the photo turns out next. So after spending 10 days building our diorama in between other projects, it only took about 30 minutes to shoot it. And then after the photo shoot, I wanted to get the plaster off before I brought it back inside and the humidity caused it to set up on the scene. So what I did was I knocked off as much of the plaster as I could outside into the grass, and then I pulled out the garden hose and I hosed off the entire diorama, cleaning the scene perfectly so that it'll be ready for another photo shoot somewhere down the road. But now I can show you the beautiful photograph that we've created from this project. It's just an absolutely magnificent shot. Chris Palomares added his magic in Photoshop with a little bit of smoke and steam, and I've got to tell you what, this is another winner. This is just an absolutely dramatic photograph that I absolutely am positive is going to help sell models. So that's this photography segment for February's What's Neat. Pretty cool project this month.